So I have a 6x6 gallery wrapped canvas. I had initially applied a wash and started painting over it, but I'm scrapping that and using it for this demo. So I used some white acrylic paint to cover it up since I didn't have gesso here at home. Normally I would sand it down to smooth it, but since we're doing an impasto painting with palette knives, no need to, because we're going to cover it up with lots of texture anyway. So you can use whatever palette knives you may have. You could use popsicle sticks, plastic knives, you could use paint brushes, really any way you want to apply the paint. You could use modeling paste, like thickening gel, or any other acrylic mediums you may have to make paint thicker as well. Now I'm using Liquitex Basics, which is pretty good on its own. You don't have to add anything to thicken it up. If you're using something like a soft body paint versus heavy body, you might want to add some gel. And like craft paints, I'll mention to you, like what I'm holding here, they tend to dry very flat, so adding thickening gel will help a ton. But if you're just using like Liquitex Basics or equivalent grade paint, you're totally fine. So I'm starting with a wash on top of my canvas, and this provides a middle value and ground for my painting. So I actually start all my paintings this way, and you can use really any color that you want to use for a wash. Now before we get started, let's take a look at some kind of different impasto techniques. A couple things I want to mention for when you're starting to apply it to your canvas itself. So I'm just going to grab a sketchbook here and just apply two little areas of some blue paint with my palette knife because I just want to illustrate two important points when you're painting with a palette knife impasto style. I will mention too, I love using palette knives because of how easy they're to clean off. Just wipe with a paper towel, good to go. Anyways, so I want to mention when you are mixing together two wet paints, they are going to blend more versus I let this second blue area dry versus when I apply wet paint on dry paint. So notice the top is wet on wet, second is wet on dry. This is just an important thing to note so you can achieve the different techniques that you want to in your painting. So to get started, I did speed up this video, but all I'm doing is using a paintbrush actually and some palette knives to just kind of initially what I call block in some color. I'm not worrying about too much texture here, although in impasto painting you could totally right off the bat start with a ton of texture. So this is really experimental, play around with it, play with colors. Acrylic painting is awesome because you can let areas dry and then go back over it if there's something you don't like. And especially this type of painting, you don't have to be done with it until you want to be done with it. So if you're not liking it, keep working it. Notice too, just a second ago, I actually flipped the painting around. And when you're painting non-representational, like I'm doing here, I'm really just focusing on colors, I'm focusing on textures, I'm focusing on, how the paint is interacting with each other, just different effects, different palette knives. Here I'm going to add a little bit of gloss medium into this just to kind of thicken up my paint a little bit more. Again, this is not something you have to do, but you can do. I just happen to love medium, so I use them in almost all of my paintings. And now I'm just continuing to build layers, but play around with different palette knives, different paint brushes. You can scratch into it, you can combine some other techniques, but really how I like to paint is I like to let areas of it dry and then I'll build it up. So it's rare that I'll sit down and finish an entire painting like this in one sitting. I suppose too, if you're feeling really impatient, you could always grab like a blow dryer, blow dry sections of your painting and then go back into it. So here I've kind of let a layer dry now, and you can kind of see there's some texture starting to happen there, but it's still relatively flat. So I like to continue to build up that texture. I'm actually adding a little thickening gel, Liquitex medium, into my paint now just to kind of build it up a little bit more, add texture. So when you're painting impasto and with a palette knife, you can decide how much texture you want. You can have a little, you can have medium, you can have a ton. So that's really up to you. I always say this type of painting is just, again, you're experimenting with color combinations, blending, you're experimenting with movement. Challenge yourself to try to create like a focal point in your art. Those are just all different things you can work on. And then I think after you try some non-representational art like this, and you're just getting a hang of the technique and medium itself, then you can try something more representational. If you go to Google and just hop on the search and Google impasto paintings or palette knife paintings, you will see so many options. I've seen animals, I've seen still lifes, I've seen landscapes. So just experiment. I'm also adding like a toothbrush and some kind of flicks and splatters of paint in here too, just to give a little something extra. So here now you can see my paint is still a little wet. It will take a little while to dry, but you can see a lot of the texture has started to build up now. I think this looks pretty good, but if I wanted to, I could let this dry and add more layers. I like my edges a little kind of loose and unfinished, although I did take the palette knife and kind of drag it a little bit onto the sides. So have fun. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you do this project, post a picture in the comments below or check me out on Instagram at Jennifer Funnel Visual Arts.